History often remembers kings, generals, and battles, but it tends to forget the silent shadows that moved unseen, changing the fate of nations. Among those shadows, there was a woman who risked her life in ways few men dared. She was not written into the grand pages of history books, but her courage carved paths for the future of intelligence and espionage. Her story is almost erased, yet without her the balance of power might have looked very different. This is the forgotten story of the first female spy in history. Before starting, subscribe to our channel and drop a comment of your experience. She lived in a world where women were not seen as warriors or decision makers. They were mothers, wives, and caretakers bound by rules set by powerful men. To defy those roles meant to walk a dangerous line, and for this woman it meant walking into a life of secrecy, betrayal, and constant danger. Her name, whispered in fragments across forgotten documents, was once spoken with both admiration and fear. She was believed to be a servant, but behind the facade of obedience she became one of the earliest figures to infiltrate enemy circles as a spy. It began in the chaos of ancient wars when kingdoms rose and fell on the strength of secrets. Armies clashed, but wars were not won only on the battlefield. They were won in whispers, in the exchange of stolen letters, in the overheard plans between generals and kings. She understood this before most did, and she realized that knowledge was more powerful than swords. Unlike soldiers, she did not march with armor. She carried silence, patience, and a sharp mind. She blended into places where no man could easily go, because no one suspected a woman of carrying dangerous intelligence. That was her strength and visibility. Legends suggest she first operated during a time when city-states fought endlessly for dominance. One powerful empire prepared to attack its rival, but plans were always hidden in guarded halls. She was sent into these spaces under the disguise of a maid. To most eyes, she was nothing more than another figure carrying food, pouring wine, sweeping floors. Yet her eyes were sharp, her ears sharper. Every word spoken at the tables of commanders became a weapon in her mind. She memorized orders, troop movements, and the secret paths that soldiers would take. Later, under cover of night, she slipped into the shadows, delivering these secrets to her allies. The danger was constant. If she was discovered, there would be no mercy. A soldier might be executed with honor, but a woman accused of treachery would be dragged through the streets and forgotten as a disgrace. Yet she pressed forward not for glory or recognition, but because she believed in something greater than herself. Some accounts describe her as fiercely loyal to her homeland. Others suggest she was driven by revenge for a family lost in war. Whatever the truth, her motives remained buried with her silence. One of her most daring missions came during a season of siege. The rival city planned a surprise assault under the cover of darkness. She overheard the strategy while refilling cups of wine for the war council. Every detail burned into her mind. The numbers of soldiers, the route they would take, the timing of the attack. She excused herself at the right moment and slipped into the night carrying nothing but her memory. The journey back was perilous. Roads were patrolled, forests were filled with bandits, and the enemy was always suspicious of strangers traveling alone. But she moved with quiet determination. By dawn, she reached her allies and shared what she had heard. The information allowed them to prepare ambushes and fortify their defenses. What should have been a crushing defeat turned into a narrow survival. That victory, though not recorded under her name, changed the course of the conflict. Her actions did not go unnoticed among those she served. Suspicion grew. A woman who appeared too quiet, too observant, became dangerous. There were whispers about her among soldiers who watched her too closely. One evening, she was summoned by her commander for questioning. They asked how she always seemed to know when to appear, when to leave, how she carried herself with such calm, even in chaos. She smiled, offered excuses, spoke of duty and respect. Her words bought her time, but trust once lost was never restored. She knew then that her days of safety were numbered. Despite the risks, she continued. She passed messages written on scraps of cloth hidden in hems of dresses. She signaled allies with simple gestures from across courtyards. She used every tool available, turning her ordinary life into a cover for extraordinary acts. Unlike men who trained for war, she trained herself to notice the smallest details. A glance exchanged between generals, the sudden quiet before a decision, the shifting of troops in the distance. To her, nothing was meaningless, everything was a clue. But history was never kind to women like her. While men who spied were remembered as heroes, women were erased, dismissed, or condemned. Her story was not carved into stone or celebrated in public records. It survived in fragments and whispered legends and footnotes of military accounts. Some historians debate whether she truly existed as a single woman, or whether her image was built from the actions of many women who served in shadows. Yet the power of her story remains. She represents the first trace of female intelligence work, and the first reminder that women could shape wars not by wielding weapons, but by wielding secrets. Her legacy, though hidden, planted seeds. Centuries later, countless women would step into the same dangerous path. They too would serve as spies, using invisibility and wit to gather information. But she was the beginning. She was the silent shadow in a world of men, the one who taught history that power could hide in the most unexpected places. After her narrow escape from suspicion, she began to understand that survival in this hidden world required more than courage. It required disguised deception, and a mind sharp enough to predict the suspicions of others before they even spoke. She learned how to walk among enemies without drawing notice, how to shift her posture and soften her voice so that no one remembered her presence. To some, she was a servant; to others, a simple village woman passing through. In truth, she was always listening, watching, and storing away every fragment of knowledge that might one day become a weapon. Her world was filled with shadows and whispers, but also with loneliness. She could not confide in anyone, not even those she served. Every friendship was a danger, every bond a risk that her secret life might be exposed. At night, when she rested in the corner of a dark chamber, she often thought of the cost of her silence. The faces of her family haunted her. Whether they were gone because of war or because of choices she had made was unclear. What mattered was that she carried those memories as a reminder of why she walked such a dangerous path. One mission pushed her resolve further than any before. The enemy had hidden documents carrying orders that could reveal their strategy for the coming months. These were stored in the private tent of a high-ranking commander, guarded day and night. She was sent into the camp disguised as a washerwoman. With a bundle of clothes and a lowered gaze, she moved among soldiers who hardly noticed her presence. She studied their routines, the way they drank at night, the way they patrolled at dawn. For days she observed without action, waiting for the single moment when a guard's attention slipped. That moment came on a night of celebration. Soldiers drank heavily, cheering the news of a small victory. Their laughter filled the campfires while the commander retired to his tent, leaving his guards distracted. She slipped quietly across the camp, blending with the shadows until she reached the tent. Her heart pounded louder than the drums in the distance. She pushed aside the flap and entered. The tent smelled of ink, wax, and leather. Maps and scrolls lay across the table. With trembling hands, she searched quickly, her eyes moving faster than her mind. She found the orders tied with a strip of cloth. She could not take them all that would be noticed, so she read by the dim flame of a lamp, memorizing each line, committing the numbers and names to memory. Every second felt like an eternity. Just as she turned to leave, the sound of footsteps approached. Her pulse quickened. She snuffed out the flame and hid in the folds of the tent, pressing herself against the shadows. The commander entered his tent, muttering to himself, drunk with wine. He threw down his cloak and collapsed on his bed without noticing her presence. She remained motionless, holding her breath for what felt like hours. Only when his snores filled the silence did she slip out once more, her body shaking from the closeness of capture. By dawn, she delivered the memorized orders to her allies. They were stunned by the detail she provided, the accuracy of numbers and routes. It was as if she had walked through the enemy's mind. Thanks to her efforts, her side managed to prepare defenses weeks ahead of the expected attacks. Once again, she had altered the outcome of a war, yet no one beyond a small circle of commanders knew of her role. Her name was not recorded. Her face was forgotten. Only the victories remained attributed to generals who never knew the full cost of their triumphs. The danger of her double life grew heavier with each mission. Soldiers grew more cautious. Whispers of spies filled the camps. She could see it in the way eyes lingered too long when she passed in the streets, or how conversations halted when she entered a room. The enemy was searching for a traitor, and though they suspected men among their ranks, she knew eventually suspicion would fall on her. Each day felt like walking along a knife's edge. Yet the more dangerous it became, the deeper she sank into her role. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps it was duty, but she could not stop. Her mind became sharper with every mission. She noticed small details others missed: the change in handwriting on a letter suggesting a forgery, the hesitation in a voice revealing a lie, the subtle shift of soldiers suggesting a new strategy. She turned these observations into weapons, delivering intelligence that shaped battles before they began. In doing so, she became not just a spy, but an unseen strategist, guiding the course of war without ever standing on a battlefield. Still, the loneliness never left her. There were nights she sat alone in the dark, listening to the distant cries of battle, wondering if anyone would ever know what she had sacrificed. There would be no statues in her name, no songs to honor her memory. She was a ghost, a shadow moving through history unseen. And yet perhaps that was her greatest strength. For as long as no one remembered her, she could continue to move freely, shaping events in silence. Her legend survived not through official records, but through quiet stories told in secret. Soldiers spoke of a mysterious woman whose warnings always seemed to arrive just in time. Commanders wondered at the strange accuracy of their intelligence. Enemies whispered of an unseen figure moving among them like a phantom. And though no one could point to her face, her actions left marks that could not be erased. In the end, she became both invisible and unforgettable. Invisible because her name never appeared in chronicles, but unforgettable because the victories she enabled changed the fate of nations. Her story would be passed down as fragments, pieces of truth hidden inside myth. And while some might doubt whether a single woman could have accomplished so much, those who understood the silent power of intelligence knew better. She had proven that wars were not always won by swords and shields, but by secrets carried in the quiet heart of one who dared to listen. The years of danger shaped her into something far more than an ordinary woman. She learned to think like her enemies, to predict their choices before they even made them. Her mind became a map of movements and intentions, where every glance, every step, every order she overheard fit into a larger pattern. This was the hidden art she mastered, an art of reading the invisible currents of war. It was a skill no one had taught her, and yet she became a master simply because survival demanded it. Her life, however, was not simply an endless chain of missions. It was also a constant struggle against fear. Every morning she woke unsure if the day would be her last. Every time she entered a camp or stood near a commander, she carried the weight of discovery. Even when she smiled and lowered her gaze, her heart was racing with the fear that one wrong word or one slip of memory would cost her everything. Yet fear never stopped her. Instead, it sharpened her. She used it as fuel to stay alert and alive. She was both fragile and unbreakable, at the same time a contradiction of human strength that few could ever endure. One of her most remarkable acts came when she discovered a plot not against armies but against civilians. During her time in service, she overheard plans of a brutal raid intended to burn entire villages as a warning to their rivals. The cruelty of it ignited a fire in her heart, for her missions had always been about defending her people, about protecting lives that never even knew she existed. This time, however, the cost was even greater. If she failed, entire families would be wiped out without mercy. She could not allow it. Under the cover of night, she set out across treacherous land to deliver the warning. She moved silently through forests and across rivers, evading patrols with nothing but instinct to guide her. Her body grew weary, her feet torn from days of walking, yet she pressed on. By the time she reached the villages, her voice was hoarse, her body nearly collapsing. She warned them of the danger, urged them to hide their children, gather what they could, and flee into the safety of the mountains. At first, they did not believe her. She was only a woman arriving in the middle of the night, speaking of armies and destruction. But the intensity in her eyes, the urgency in her voice convinced them. Families abandoned their homes, carrying only what they could hold. When the soldiers finally arrived, they found empty homes and silent streets. The villages had vanished into the mountains like ghosts. The soldiers burned the empty houses, but the lives they had sought to destroy were spared. The people owed their survival to a woman they would never truly know. She disappeared again into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the faint memory of a warning that saved them. Her role grew heavier with each passing year. Though she had saved many, she also saw horrors that could not be undone. She watched villages fall when her warnings arrived too late. She heard the cries of the dying when battles raged, and she could not intervene. These memories carved deep scars into her heart, yet she did not turn away. She accepted that this was the burden of her path. A spy's victories were invisible, and her failures were heavy and personal. It was a lonely road, but she continued to walk it. Her reputation began to spread in quiet ways. Among her allies, she was spoken of as a phantom protector, a woman who always seemed to know more than anyone else. Among her enemies, she became a figure of suspicion. They knew someone was watching them, someone invisible who carried their secrets to the other side. They searched for her but found nothing. They suspected their own men, but the truth was too simple for them to see. They could never imagine that the threat was a woman disguised in plain sight. What kept her going was not glory nor the hope of recognition. It was the belief that her people deserved to live free from the crushing weight of endless wars. Every mission, every secret carried was her way of resisting the chaos that devoured lives without reason. Though she knew history would not remember her, she hoped her sacrifices would live on through the survival of those she protected. She did not fight for a name, she fought for a future. But with each passing season, the danger pressed closer. The enemy grew sharper and more suspicious. The space for her invisibility grew narrower. One night, she narrowly escaped capture when guards searched the quarters where she had been working. She hid in a storage room behind jars of grain, listening as soldiers cursed and tore through the place. One of them came so close she could see the light of his torch through the cracks in the wood. She held her breath until her lungs ached, praying that silence would save her. At last they left, muttering that their search was in vain. She waited hours before slipping out, vanishing again into the night. It was a reminder that her time was running short. She could not play this dangerous game forever. Still she pressed on, for there was no other life left for her. She had crossed a line long ago when she chose secrecy over safety. She could no longer imagine living as an ordinary woman. She belonged to the shadows, and the shadows were where she would remain until her final breath. Her story at this stage became more than a tale of survival. It was the birth of a legacy. She was among the first to show that women could alter wars not as queens or leaders, but as hidden figures who wielded silence as their sword. Though her name faded from history, her actions lit the path for countless others who would follow in centuries to come. She became the invisible mother of espionage, the root from which all future female spies would unknowingly grow. The longer she lived in the shadows, the more her identity as a woman ceased to matter. To her enemies, she was no one; to her allies, she was a ghost; and to herself, she became something between human and myth. She no longer thought of her reflection; she no longer thought of what her life could have been had she chosen a safer path. She existed only for the gathering of secrets and the survival of her people. Yet beneath the hardened surface, she was still human, and every mission left its mark on her spirit. One winter, during a time of bitter conflict, she found herself deeper inside enemy territory than ever before. A powerful general had begun forming an alliance with nearby tribes, and if successful, it would create an army too vast for her homeland to resist. She knew the meeting would be secret and heavily guarded, but she also knew it was her only chance. Disguised once again as a servant, she gained entry into the encampment where the talks were to be held. For days she worked quietly, sweeping, carrying, and fetching as if she were nothing more than another set of hands. All the while she studied the layout of the camp, the schedules of the guards, and the habits of the men who thought themselves untouchable. The night of the meeting came heavy with storm clouds. Rain poured down, drumming against the tents and drowning out footsteps. She moved silently through the mud, her hair plastered to her face, her hands numb from the cold. She slipped into the shadows of the council tent, where the general and his allies spoke over maps and cups of steaming drink. The storm worked in her favor, muffling the sounds of her movements. She crouched in the darkness, listening as they plotted the unification of their armies and planned their march across the borders. Every detail she caught was another dagger in their design. She could not risk being seen, leaving with written notes, so she repeated the words in her mind over and over, shaping them into patterns she would not forget. Numbers of men promised routes they would march, timing of their strikes, all committed to her memory. But this time the danger was sharper. One of the guards entered unexpectedly, bringing fresh wood for the fire. The flames roared higher, and for a moment her shadow flickered on the wall. The guard turned, eyes narrowing at the strange shape in the corner. She froze like a statue, her heart pounding louder than the thunder outside. The guard stepped closer, suspicion burning in his gaze. Just as he raised his torch to search the corner, another soldier called out from outside, and the man turned away, cursing under his breath. The moment passed, but she knew her luck had thinned to a thread. She waited until the men drank themselves into distraction, then slipped back into the rain, disappearing into the black night as if she had never been there. Her journey home with this intelligence was perhaps the most dangerous she had ever faced. Rivers had swollen from the rains, and crossings that were once shallow now roared with deadly force. Twice she nearly drowned, and twice she pulled herself to the bank, shivering and exhausted. Wild dogs prowled the forests, their eyes glowing in the night, and she had nothing but a broken branch to defend herself. Hunger gnawed at her belly as she walked for days with little food, but still she pressed on. The weight of what she carried was not on her back but in her mind, and she knew that failure was not an option. When at last she reached her homeland, she collapsed before her commanders. With ragged breath she delivered every detail of what she had heard. They listened wide-eyed as she recited numbers, names, and plans with the precision of one who had carved it all into her very bones. Because of her warning, the alliance was shattered before it could take root. Her people struck swiftly, destroying supply lines and scattering tribes before they could join the general. What might have been the end of her homeland instead became a chance for survival, all because of her unseen sacrifice. Though she saved them again, her life grew darker. She knew that each mission left trails, each mission left questions. The enemy was searching more fiercely than ever for the phantom in their ranks. Rewards were offered for any information leading to the capture of a spy. Villagers were questioned, soldiers were punished, suspicion spread like fire through dry fields. And though no one could prove it, she felt the tightening noose of danger around her. There were moments when she longed to stop, to simply vanish into a quiet life where no one knew her past. Perhaps she could live as a farmer's wife or as a wanderer in the hills free from the endless shadows. But each time the thought came, it was followed by the sound of marching feet, by the memory of burning homes, by the cries of children she had saved. She understood then that there was no turning back. The life she had chosen was not a role she could abandon, it had become who she was. She was not a wife, not a mother, not a simple woman. She was the shadow that walked between armies and carried the balance of life in her silence. The weight of her choices grew heavier as years passed. Her hair darkened with dust, her hands roughened with work, her body carrying the strain of endless journeys. But her eyes remained sharp and her spirit unbroken. She had seen the worst of men, and yet she had also seen the resilience of the innocent. That was what she fought for, not power, not recognition, but the fragile hope of peace for those who could not fight for themselves. Her legend continued to grow, even as she moved in silence. Some called her a ghost, some said she was a spirit sent by the gods to protect the weak. None knew the truth that she was flesh and blood, risking everything with each passing day. And though her name was still hidden, she became something larger than herself. A story whispered in secret, a reminder that even in a world ruled by men, one woman could shift the course of history. Her life continued in the shadows, but the stakes grew higher with every passing season. The enemy no longer looked at her as a mere woman or servant, but as a formidable adversary who seemed to anticipate their every move. They tightened security. They scrutinized every face that passed through their camps and increased patrols on the roads she had once traveled freely. Yet she adapted with the skill of someone who had been forged in danger from a young age. She became quieter, slower in her movements, and even more cautious in her observations. Every glance, every whisper had meaning. Every sound became a signal. One mission tested not just her skills but her resolve in ways she had never imagined. A convoy carrying vital intelligence was scheduled to move across treacherous terrain, through forests known for ambushes. Her task was not only to observe but to intercept without drawing attention. Failure meant the enemy would strengthen their position and countless lives could be lost. Disguised once more, she assumed the guise of a traveling merchant, bringing fruits and herbs to distant villages. She moved with a basket in hand and a careful gait, blending into the countryside that had always been her ally. The forest was dense, and the shadows deep. She had memorized the route using signs in nature, the markings on trees, the sound of streams, and the movement of birds. Every misstep could alert the soldiers traveling in the convoy. She followed them silently for miles, listening to their commands, counting their numbers, and noting the placement of guards. Her eyes missed nothing from the brand on a horse to the slight limp of a soldier. These details would allow her allies to predict not just the route, but the vulnerabilities of the convoy. At night she prepared for her final move. The convoy rested by a river, and she hid among the reeds, observing the guards and the terrain. She sent signals using smoke and flickers of fire to alert allies hidden in the trees above. Timing was everything. A single miscalculation would result in capture. Her body shivered from the cold and her hands trembled with exhaustion, but her mind was razor sharp. She calculated the exact moment when the guards would be distracted by the moonlight and the water would reflect the shadows, just enough to allow her to move unnoticed. When the moment arrived, she moved, like a shadow slipping across the ground, delivering the intercepted messages and marking weak points in the convoy's formation. Her presence was so silent that not a single horse or soldier noticed her. By dawn, her allies were in position, using the intelligence she had gathered to prepare an ambush. The convoy was diverted and key supplies were taken without a single life lost. Her mission was a success, but it came at a cost. She had to travel deep into enemy lands to deliver the intelligence and nearly faced capture multiple times. Even as victories mounted, her isolation deepened. She could trust no one completely, not even those she served. Friendships were dangerous distractions. Love was impossible. To reveal any part of herself would be to risk exposure. Each time she felt the warmth of connection, she pushed it away, knowing that her life required total dedication to secrecy and survival. She became a master of emotional solitude, finding strength in the knowledge that she was shaping events that no one would ever know were influenced by her actions. Her story reached whispers of legend among soldiers and spies alike. Some swore that she was everywhere and nowhere at once, that a single woman had eyes in every camp and ears in every tent. Enemies panicked at the thought that a phantom observed their movements. Her name remained unknown, but the fear she inspired and the protection she offered created a paradoxical presence. She was both invisible and omnipresent, and it became clear that history itself could not ignore her, even if it never recorded her. The complexity of her life required constant adaptation. She developed codes and signals never written down, using colors of cloth placed in windows or subtle gestures that only her allies could interpret. Every move she made had to be precise and intentional. She became an expert in disguises, altering not just her clothing but her mannerisms and speech to fit each environment. Villages saw her as one person, towns as another, and no one ever suspected that the quiet woman delivering bread or mending clothes was the same one directing the course of wars. She also learned patience. Some missions required months of observation and waiting. She became skilled at enduring boredom, discomfort, and uncertainty, knowing that the right moment would determine success. Patience became her weapon alongside her intellect and courage. She understood that war was not only fought with armies and weapons, but also with timing and knowledge, and she wielded those as fiercely as any general with a sword. Despite the constant peril and sacrifices, her resolve never wavered. She had seen the worst of humanity, the cruelty and destruction wrought by unchecked ambition, but she had also seen courage and resilience in those she protected. This duality became the core of her being. She understood that her life would always be filled with danger and loneliness, but it also carried purpose and meaning. Every risk she took, every mission she completed was a statement that one person, even invisible and unacknowledged, could change the course of history. And yet the question of legacy haunted her. She knew that history favored men and celebrated victories on the battlefield, while women like her remained hidden in footnotes or whispers. She accepted that her name might never be written or remembered, but she also realized that the true measure of her life was not recognition, but impact. The villages she saved, the armies she aided, and the balance she preserved were the echoes of her work. In the end, her legacy was alive in the continued survival and freedom of others, even if the world never knew the architect of those victories. Time passed, and the years of espionage weighed heavily upon her body, though her mind remained as sharp as ever. She had grown accustomed to danger and solitude, but even the strongest must eventually reckon with exhaustion and weariness. Nights became colder, her bones ached from endless travel, and her meals were often meager, yet she persisted because the stakes were higher than any personal comfort. She understood that every moment she rested was a moment the enemy could gain advantage, and that knowledge fueled her relentless pursuit of duty. Her reputation as the unseen protector became more entrenched among those she aided. Commanders began to rely on her intelligence without knowing her face or name. Entire strategies were formed based on her observations and warnings, and wars were altered subtly yet decisively through the secrets she gathered. Even as her enemies intensified their searches, they could never catch a shadow they could not name. It became clear to her that invisibility was her greatest weapon, and she had mastered it completely. There came a mission that tested not only her skills but her moral compass. A treaty was being negotiated between warring factions that could bring temporary peace but carried hidden betrayals that would lead to mass slaughter. She learned of it through careful observation and overheard conversations, and realized that revealing this information could save thousands of lives but would also risk her exposure. She spent nights weighing every choice, calculating outcomes, considering probabilities, and imagining consequences. The burden of knowledge was almost unbearable, yet she knew there was no alternative. To act or not to act was not a question, but a necessity. On the day of the secret meeting, she disguised herself as a traveling nurse tending to the sick and wounded. Her presence went unnoticed as she moved among the tents caring for the injured, while mentally noting the positions of guards and the words of negotiators. She memorized coded instructions hidden in letters exchanged during the talks, and observed subtle gestures that betrayed hidden intentions. Every motion she saw was carefully stored in her mind, ready to be delivered at the precise moment. Her skill at observation was unparalleled, and she became the invisible record of history in motion. When the opportunity arose, she discreetly informed her allies of the hidden betrayal, allowing them to act preemptively. Armies that might have been ambushed were warned and civilians spared from violence. The treaty was renegotiated with precautions and the bloodshed avoided. Again, her actions changed the course of events without ever stepping into the spotlight. She remained in the shadows as she always had, her contribution invisible to those who wrote history, yet monumental to those who lived through it. Despite these successes, her personal life suffered. She had no companion, no family, no home she could claim as her own. Her identity as a spy demanded that she sever connections that might endanger herself or others. Love was impossible and friendship was dangerous. Even the moments of warmth she allowed herself were fleeting, because they threatened to compromise her secret. She learned to accept loneliness not as punishment but as a companion. It became part of who she was and allowed her to focus entirely on her mission. Her mind, however, continued to grow. She invented subtle codes for messages using patterns in fabric, the placement of objects, and even variations in speech that allowed information to move undetected across enemy lines. She trained herself to recall every face, every movement, every conversation she had ever observed. Her memory became a living archive, an intelligence network contained entirely within her mind. Those who relied on her never realized the extraordinary capacity required for such feats. There were close calls that reminded her of the fragility of her existence. Once she was discovered by a patrol while crossing a mountain pass in the dead of winter. She hid under snow-laden rocks and remained immobile for hours while the soldiers passed within feet of her. Another time, she was nearly recognized by a former ally who had forgotten she had operated in disguise in another region. Quick thinking, a subtle lie, and a change of attire saved her from capture. Each close encounter reinforced her, understanding that survival was not guaranteed, and that every mission required meticulous care and unwavering alertness. Even in these dangerous moments, she never wavered in her commitment. Each risk she took, each secret she carried reinforced her belief that her existence, though unseen, was essential. She had become the backbone of a covert network without equal, the invisible strategist whose intelligence shaped the fates of nations. Her understanding of human nature, her keen observation, and her unwavering courage set her apart from even the most experienced soldiers or spies. She was a pioneer, though history would not recognize her as such. Through all of this, she carried a quiet sense of pride, not for fame or recognition, but for impact. The people she protected, the lives saved, the plans thwarted, and the wars influenced, they were her legacy. Her story, fragmented and hidden, was a testament to the power of one person acting with intelligence and courage in a world dominated by men. She had proven that influence did not require armies or titles, but the ability to understand, anticipate, and act with precision. Even as the years took their toll, she remained undeterred. Her eyes retained their sharpness, her mind its clarity, and her heart its resolve. She had become something more than human and yet entirely human in her devotion to duty. Invisibility had become a cloak, danger a companion, and secrecy a language she spoke fluently. Her story would survive in whispers, legends, and fragments of history. Though her name was lost, the impact of her actions would endure as a silent force shaping the world long after she had faded from sight. As time went on, the battles she influenced became larger, more complex, and more dangerous. The enemies she spied on were no longer just small groups of soldiers or local commanders. Entire empires and coalitions began to rely on strategies that she had shaped without ever stepping into the light. She had become an invisible hand guiding events, a silent architect of outcomes that could have otherwise resulted in chaos and destruction. Her mind moved faster than armies, faster than the generals who believed themselves in control. She had become a force of intellect and stealth that could not be measured by ordinary means. Despite the growing scale of her missions, she never lost sight of the people she served. Villages, towns, and families who were in the crossfire of war were her true concern. She understood that history might remember kings and generals, but she valued the survival of ordinary lives. Every intercepted letter, every coded message, Every secret observed was a thread in the vast web of protection she wove around the innocent. Her presence, though unseen, meant the difference between life and death for countless people who would never know her name. The techniques she developed during these years became extraordinary. She could move through enemy camps unnoticed, memorize long sequences of spoken orders, and predict maneuvers based on subtle behaviors that others overlooked. She created an entire system of signals that required no written communication. Gestures, placements of objects, and shifts in routine that conveyed critical information across miles. Her mind functioned as a living archive of intelligence, storing data with perfect clarity and recalling it at will. Even seasoned commanders marveled at the accuracy and timing of the intelligence that reached them. Unaware that it originated entirely from a single woman, there were moments of extreme danger that tested her to the limits of endurance. Once, during a mission to uncover a plot that threatened multiple cities, she was trapped in a fortress under siege. Soldiers flooded the courtyard, searching for any signs of spies. She hid in the shadows, barely breathing, while the chaos of battle raged around her. For hours she remained completely still, her body pressed against cold stone walls, listening to enemy commands, memorizing movements, and waiting for the right moment to slip away. The experience nearly broke her physically, but her resolve remained unshaken. She emerged from the fortress as quietly as she had entered, delivering information that would save countless lives. Her isolation deepened as the years went by. Trust was dangerous, companionship impossible, and any personal connection could jeopardize everything she had worked for. She found solace in the rhythm of her missions, the clarity of her observations, and the knowledge that her work mattered. Loneliness became a constant companion, shaping her into someone who needed nothing beyond her purpose. She no longer questioned why she walked this path. She understood that her life had been chosen for her by circumstance and necessity. She had become the embodiment of secrecy and vigilance. Despite the peril and exhaustion, she also experienced fleeting moments of human connection. Occasionally, she would witness acts of bravery, kindness, or loyalty among the people she helped. These moments reminded her that the risks she took were meaningful, that her sacrifices had value beyond strategy and intelligence. A single saved family, a village that escaped destruction, or a soldier who found mercy because of her intervention became her silent reward. These small victories were the proof that her existence, though hidden, mattered. Over time, her identity as a spy became almost mythical. Soldiers whispered of a shadow that could not be caught. Commanders marveled at intelligence that appeared without explanation, and enemies feared a ghost that always seemed to be one step ahead. Rumors circulated that she could predict their actions, that she was everywhere at once, that no man could outwit her. While these legends grew, she remained completely unseen. She did not seek fame, glory, or recognition. Her satisfaction came from knowing that her work had impact, that her efforts shaped outcomes and preserved lives in ways history would never formally record. Her physical endurance, however, could not defy time indefinitely. Her body bore the marks of decades of perilous missions, scars from narrow escapes, bruises from travel and combat, and the constant strain of evading capture left their imprint. Yet her mind remained sharp, her resolve unbroken. She understood that she could not live forever, but she also understood that the influence of her actions could endure beyond her physical existence. Her story was not about herself. It was about the lives she saved and the balance she maintained. As the years passed, she became not only a spy but a strategist, an observer of human nature, and a pioneer in the art of intelligence. She recognized patterns in behavior, predicted outcomes with astonishing accuracy, and influenced events at the highest levels without ever drawing attention. She had demonstrated that power did not require armies or titles. It required insight, courage, and the willingness to act when others were blind. She had become the foundation upon which the future of espionage would be built, though she would never be acknowledged as such. Even as she aged, she never ceased her vigilance. Each day brought new threats, new opportunities, and new missions. Her commitment to her cause never faltered, and the lives she protected became her enduring legacy. She had transformed invisibility into strength, secrecy into influence, and courage into an unstoppable force. Her existence, though hidden from history, shaped the destinies of nations and saved countless lives. In every shadow she moved, in every whisper she listened to, and in every action she took, she left a mark that history could never erase, even if it never knew her name. In the final years of her life, she became a legend in silence, a shadow that had shaped the fates of countless people and nations without ever being recognized. Her missions became more calculated, her instincts sharper, and her understanding of human behavior deeper than ever before. Though her body had begun to tire, her mind retained its clarity and precision. She moved with a quiet confidence that came from decades of survival, observation, and action. Every step she took was measured, every word she uttered calculated, every glance purposeful. Even as the enemies she had evaded for years intensified their searches, she adapted and evolved. Disguises became more elaborate, movements more deliberate, and signals more intricate. She developed an unparalleled ability to read intentions from subtle shifts in posture, tone, and expression. No plan went unnoticed, no betrayal escaped her attention, and no mission was ever too dangerous to attempt. She had learned that invisibility was not merely a skill but a philosophy, a way of existing that allowed her to influence the world without leaving a trace. Her life of secrecy and sacrifice had left her isolated, yet she carried a profound sense of purpose. She knew that the victories she enabled were not hers to claim but theirs to enjoy, and she accepted that without bitterness or regret. In her mind, the preservation of life, the protection of communities, and the subtle guidance of powerful decisions were worth far more than recognition or fame. She had learned that influence could be exercised quietly, and that true power often required humility and discretion. There were moments, rare and fleeting, when she allowed herself to reflect on the life she might have had, a family of her own, a quiet home, simple joys of companionship and love. Yet even in these thoughts she understood that her choices had been deliberate, driven by necessity and conviction. Her work had created ripples that reached far beyond what she could have imagined, and she had come to find contentment in knowing that the lives she saved and the battles she influenced were her enduring testament. Her legacy began to extend beyond the immediate outcomes of her missions. The techniques she developed, the methods of observation and intelligence gathering, became the foundation upon which future generations of spies would unknowingly build. She had pioneered methods of covert communication, memorization, and strategy that were revolutionary for her time. While she herself remained unrecognized, the influence of her work echoed across decades, centuries, and borders. Her story became a silent blueprint for the unseen warriors who followed in her footsteps. As she aged, the dangers of her profession became more apparent. The enemy's knowledge, their persistence, and their obsession with uncovering the phantom who had thwarted them for so long created an ever-present threat. She moved cautiously, aware that one misstep could end her life and undo the delicate balance she had worked to maintain. Her courage was no longer defined solely by daring exploits but by patience, foresight, and the ability to navigate a world increasingly aware of the shadows. She had become not just a spy but a strategist, a philosopher of secrecy, and a guardian of lives hidden from history. Her final acts of service were no less extraordinary than her earliest missions. She intercepted plans that threatened entire cities, warned communities of impending attacks, and guided armies with intelligence that seemed almost prophetic. Even as her strength waned, her mind remained undimmed. She trained younger allies, passing on knowledge without revealing her identity, ensuring that her work would continue long after she could no longer act herself. In this way, she secured her legacy not in fame but in the continuity of her craft, in the preservation of lives, and in the perpetuation of her methods. Though history never recorded her name, the impact of her actions endured. Villages remained intact, families survived, and conflicts were altered by her intelligence. Generals and commanders credited luck or divine providence, never realizing that their successes were often the result of her careful observation, meticulous planning, and unflinching courage. She became a ghost not only in the eyes of her enemies but in the pages of history, a silent guardian whose work shaped the world in ways no chronicler could ever capture. In her final days, she reflected on the life she had led. She understood that invisibility had been both her curse and her gift. It had isolated her from ordinary joys but allowed her to wield a form of power unmatched by armies or rulers. She had lived a life of sacrifice, danger, and extraordinary courage, shaping the course of events while remaining unknown, and in that knowledge she found peace. Her story, though hidden, had mattered more than any recognition could have. She had changed the world quietly, invisibly, and decisively, She passed from this life as she had lived it, unseen, yet leaving an indelible mark on the world. Her name was forgotten, her face erased from history, yet the consequences of her actions endured. Generations of spies, soldiers, and strategists would unknowingly follow in her footsteps, guided by the methods she had pioneered and the example she had set. She became a symbol of courage, intelligence, and sacrifice that transcended recognition. Though her story was untold, it shaped the course of history in ways that would never be forgotten by those whose lives she had touched. Her existence proved a profound truth: that one individual, even unrecognized, could alter the fate of nations. Her legacy was not carved in stone or written in books, but lived on in the safety of countless lives, the successes of those who owed her nothing, and the enduring influence of her strategies and methods. The first female spy in history had left the world forever changed, a silent architect of survival and strategy, whose story, though forgotten, would resonate through the ages in every shadow of courage and every act of unseen heroism.